If you're looking for ways to improve your bullet journal index, or maybe you're not even sure if you want to include an index in your journal at all, then this video is for you. We're going to look at 10 different ideas for making the index a staple in your bullet journal, and the first one relates to what you actually put in your index. In the original bullet journal method, we're encouraged to not put daily logs or weekly logs into our index because they end up adding a lot of clutter. Instead, keep your index to your main collections, whether that be things like the future log or your monthly logs, or any custom collections that you in particular want to reference. Not only does this cut down on how much you have to write in your index, but it also means that it only summarizes the locations of the things that you most want to reference. Dedicating multiple pages in your journal to an index when you're not necessarily so sure if you're going to use it can feel like a bit of a risk. In this case, one of the ways that we can maximize the space in our index without having to use multiple pages is just dividing the page in half. This can give you multiple columns to write your index entries in, and is also a handy tip for if you run out of space in your index. A super full index can be a little bit overwhelming to look at, and can make finding pages in your journal a time-consuming process if you have to read through all of those entries. One way to make finding things in your index faster and easier is to code it either with color or signifiers. Highlight important entries in your index with a colored marker, or put a symbol to the side of any entry that you know you'll be likely to refer back to in future. You can also take this a step further and color code all of the index entries of one particular type with one color or signifier. For example, if you have several collections related to a particular topic, or maybe highlighting the entry that shows the start of a new month. When it comes to referring to or populating your index, it can be a little bit of a pain having to flip back and forth between the index page and whatever collection that you're working on. One solution to this is to either make a flip out or detachable index. Flip out indexes are those that you washi tape into the front of your journal so that they can be flipped out to the side and you can see your index entries from any page in your journal. A detachable index is done in a similar way, so having it done on a separate piece of paper that can either be stored in the back pocket of your notebook or washi taped into the front cover. Both of these types of indexes, though, can be referred to while you're working within the pages of your notebook, rather than having to flip back to the front. If your journal contains a lot of collections that are related to specific themes or topics, it can be really useful to set up what's called a dedicated index. This is an index that is separate from the main one that you have in your journal, and it only summarizes collections related to a particular thing. This could be something like a dedicated index related to work entries versus another one related to goals, or another one related to household projects. It really depends on what you're using your journal for, but it's just an easier way to see all of the collections related to one thing without having to worry about everything else. You can also do this in a similar way in your regular index. Rather than writing out the collections in the order that they appear, you instead separate your index into different sections related to the themes or topics you keep in your journal. Then, when you have a collection related to any of those themes, you just put it into the relevant section. One of the things that trips a lot of beginners up is the difference between an index in a book versus an index in a bullet journal. While the index in a book is alphabetized, the index in your bullet journal typically isn't. But if you wanted to go with a more indexy index, you could of course alphabetize your index entries. It can be a little bit hard to do this during the lifetime of your notebook, just because you're likely going to add things to your index as you make those collections in your journal. But using a similar idea to the categorized index that we talked about before, your categories could just be letters. So all the collections that start with A, all the collections that start with B, and so on and so forth. Of course, there are some letters that probably don't need so much space. We're thinking things like Q, X, Z, but again, this very much depends on what you like to use your journal for. This type of index does require you to have pretty memorable names for each of your different collections, so that you can remember what letter they'd actually go under. For instance, the future log. Does that go under F for future log? Does it go under L for log? Or I guess you could put it under T for the? I probably wouldn't go with that option though. One of the friction points with the bullet journaling practice is migration, and in particular, migration between notebooks. It can be kind of a pain to have to set up collections again and again as you migrate to new notebooks, and you might just want to keep a collection in one journal, not move it forward, and still reference it in future. If that's the case, then you could set up what I'm going to call a long-term index. This type of index would be done as a detachable index that you can take with you from journal to journal, and it summarizes any of those collections in your previous journals that you might want to reference again in future. This type of index would allow you to easily find pages across multiple notebooks, and in setting up this long-term index, you of course need page numbers, like you would with any index, but you also need a way to refer to which notebook those things are in. This could be something like numbering your journals, alphabetizing your journals, or naming your journals. If you're still not convinced about whether you need an index in your journal, then that's totally fair. I don't typically use one in my everyday journal. I just use it for the journals where things aren't necessarily in chronological order, and I know that future me isn't necessarily going to know where everything's placed. The purpose of the index though is navigation, and there are other ways that we can navigate through our journal without having to use an index. Some examples of these are things like bookmark ribbons, which you can put on particular pages in your notebook so that you can quickly turn to them. Similarly, you can use other styles of bookmarks, for instance ones that you've made yourself, or magnetic ones that clip on the side of a page. Tabs and dividers are a great way to find different sections in your notebook, in particular having them at the start of each new month, or on collections that you need to reference more often. Thinking again about the idea of themed collections, or collections all related to one particular topic, putting a coloured square or section along the edge of a page is another way that you can quickly indicate the contents of that page. As you fill out your notebook and put those little squares of colour in, you can easily see from the side of your notebook where those kind of pieces of information are located. A similar idea to this is using washi tape borders. Simply run washi tape along one side of the page such that you can wrap the other half of the washi over to the other side and secure it in place. This way, when your notebook is closed, you'll easily be able to see the washi tape indicating that that page is important. We mentioned in this section that tabs and dividers can be used instead of your index, but you can also use them with your index if you want to. And when it comes to making these in your journal, they're actually a lot easier than a lot of people think. If you wanted to find out the different ways you can make tabs in your journal, then we do have a separate video on that topic. There are more options for these than most people assume, so click or tap on that one and I'll see you over there.